They said I should be grateful, that I raised a good man, that now it was time for me to step aside and let the new family grow. So I did. I stepped aside. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and walked out of the house I built alone. No farewell, no one followed. 5 years passed in silence. No calls, no birthdays, not even a text. Then, one rainy night, a knock at my door shattered everything. There she stood, my daughter-in-law, soaked and trembling, holding a child I had never met. "He's gone," she whispered. "I have no one left. Please take him." I looked at the boy. He had Jacob's eyes, but I wasn't the same woman they abandoned 5 years ago. I had changed, and what I said next wasn't what anyone expected. Clara Thompson had lived in the same house for over 30 years. It wasn't big, and it certainly wasn't modern. The wallpaper had peeled in the hallway, the roof had leaked twice last winter, and the stairs creaked so loudly they could wake the dead. But to Clara, it was home. Every scratch on the kitchen table, every photo frame on the mantel, every flower in the backyard garden carried a memory. It was the place where she brought her only son, Jacob, home from the hospital. The place where she whispered bedtime stories and kissed scraped knees. The place where she became both mother and father after her husband died in a car accident when Jacob was only 2. Clara was 68 now. The house seemed bigger, quieter. It had become a museum of a life that once bustled with the chaos of childhood and the warmth of dreams she never dared to voice. She didn't mind the silence. She'd grown used to talking to Jacob in her head. There were 3 times Clara saved Jacob's life. The first was when he was just 3. He woke up one night burning with fever, his tiny body convulsing in her arms. She didn't even put on shoes. She wrapped him in a blanket, ran down the icy steps, and banged on a neighbor's door to borrow their car. The doctors said if she'd waited 10 more minutes, it could have been fatal. She didn't sleep that night, just sat by his hospital bed, whispering, "You stay with me, baby. Don't leave me too." The second time was when he was 10. He'd taken his bike too far down the hill and collided with a parked car. Blood everywhere. Clara had just gotten home from work, double shift at the diner, and dropped her groceries when she saw him lying on the pavement. She screamed so loudly that the whole block came out. She rode in the ambulance holding his hand, praying out loud in the back, bargaining with God like a desperate gambler. Jacob needed 12 stitches and had a mild concussion. Clara stayed awake that night too, watching him breathe. The third time was the worst. Jacob was 17, complaining of a stomach ache that turned into unbearable pain. Clara knew it wasn't just food poisoning. She drove him straight to the ER and refused to sit in the waiting room until someone looked at him. His appendix had ruptured. The surgeon told her afterward that her stubbornness might have saved his life. 3 times, 3 different years. But every time Clara had felt the same primal fear that she would lose the last thing keeping her heart beating. And every time she whispered the same promise, "I'll trade my life for yours. No question." But there were other things Clara gave up that didn't involve ambulances or operating rooms. Things Jacob never knew about. Like the man she almost married when Jacob was 9. His name was Harold. He was kind, steady, and loved old music. He brought Clara flowers every week, fixed her leaking faucet, and taught Jacob how to fish. For a while, Clara thought she might get a second chance at love. But one night, Jacob sat on the stairs while Harold kissed her goodnight at the door. Clara didn't notice him watching. The next morning, Jacob refused to speak. He didn't eat breakfast. That afternoon, he cried and told her he didn't want another dad. So Clara ended it. She told Harold it wasn't the right time, that Jacob needed her. Harold didn't argue. He just nodded, smiled sadly, and never came back. Clara cried in the laundry room that night so Jacob wouldn't hear. She never dated again. Some would call it foolish. Some would say she was too soft, too self-sacrificing. But Clara didn't regret it. She had made her choice. Jacob always came first. In her dresser drawer, wrapped in a silk scarf, she kept a small card. It was handmade, red construction paper folded unevenly, covered in glitter glue and misspelled words. It read, "Happy birthday, Mom. I love you more than chocolate." It was the first birthday card Jacob ever wrote by himself. Clara looked at it more times than she'd admit. On hard days, it reminded her of the boy who once reached for her hand in fear, not the man who no longer called. Clara had worked at the county library for over 30 years. She loved books, not just for their stories, but for the silence they brought. After her husband died, the library became her second home, her sanctuary. It was quiet, predictable, safe. But at 65, when Jacob announced he was getting married, Clara did something most people wouldn't expect. She retired early. It wasn't that she was tired of working, but she wanted to be present. She wanted to help plan the wedding, pick flowers, taste cakes, and stitch little pieces of love into every corner of that day. She cashed out her modest retirement savings, every penny she had squirreled away since her 40s, and told Jacob, "This is your future. Let me give you something beautiful to start with." He didn't protest. He just smiled and hugged her. That was enough. Clara poured herself into the preparations. She met with florists, toured venues, negotiated catering deals, and designed the invitations. She even offered to host the rehearsal dinner in her backyard, the same garden where Jacob once chased butterflies and learned to ride a bike. But the most special thing she did was for Sophie, her soon-to-be daughter-in-law. In her closet, Clara kept an old wooden box filled with heirlooms, ribbons, lace, embroidered napkins, and a delicate handkerchief her mother had made for Clara's own wedding. It was the only thing she had left of her. Clara had never used it, afraid of ruining something so fragile. Now it felt right to pass it on. She spent weeks hand-stitching Sophie's initials onto the corner, using thread the color of winter lavender. Every night after dinner, she'd sit by the window, sewing under the soft glow of the lamp, whispering blessings into each loop and swirl. When she gave it to Sophie, the girl smiled politely, said thank you, and slipped it into her purse. Clara tried not to read too much into it. The day of the wedding was perfect. Blue skies, a soft breeze, and just enough warmth in the air to make everyone smile. Clara wore a pale gray dress and pinned her hair back with a clip Jacob had given her when he was 12. She helped Sophie's mother adjust the bride's veil, took photos with distant relatives, and even calmed down a crying flower girl with a lollipop she'd hidden in her purse just in case. But when the reception began, something shifted. The master of ceremonies took the mic, thanking the wonderful families who'd made the day possible. He named Sophie's parents with glowing praise, the incredible Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds who hosted the beautiful bridal brunch and who helped bring this amazing couple together. Applause erupted, glasses clinked, then silence. No mention of Clara, not a word. She waited. Maybe he'd circle back. Maybe Jacob would grab the mic and say something, anything, but he didn't. He stood there smiling with his arm around Sophie, laughing with her parents, never once glancing toward the corner where Clara sat alone at a table near the restrooms. She told herself it didn't matter, that the joy of seeing her son happy was enough, that she didn't need recognition. But as the speeches went on, as the toasts were raised and memories shared, the ache in her chest grew louder than the music. She slipped away during dessert. Inside the venue's restroom, she locked herself in a stall and sat on the closed toilet lid, clutching her clutch purse like a lifeline. The noise of the party outside muffled through the walls, laughter, music, the clinking of silverware. Clara pulled out a tissue, then the handkerchief. She unfolded it slowly, running her fingers over the tiny lavender initials. The corners were slightly damp. She hadn't even noticed she was crying. She didn't cry because of what was said. She cried because of what wasn't. Because after everything, after 3 near deaths, after birthday cakes and school plays, after giving up love and retirement, she had become invisible in the moment that should have mattered most. And Jacob? He didn't even look for her. The wedding was over, and Clara told herself things would settle. They always did, eventually. She moved into the guest room of Jacob and Sophie's new house, a cozy 2-story in a quiet cul-de-sac. At first, she tried to stay out of the way. She cooked breakfast, watered the plants, folded laundry. She didn't want to be a burden. She just wanted to be useful, needed. But slowly, the tone of the house began to shift. At dinner, the conversation started happening without her. Sophie and Jacob would talk about work, about weekend plans, about home decor. Clara would sit silently nodding, occasionally asking a question, only to be met with a quick, "We'll let you know," or, "Oh, we already handled that." She started noticing the little things, like how her favorite coffee mug disappeared from the cupboard, or how the family calendar on the fridge no longer listed her doctor appointments. Then one day, she walked into the living room and saw a new set of photos framed above the mantel. Sophie's graduation, Jacob's office party, their honeymoon in Florida. Not a single picture of Clara remained. She stood there for a long time, staring at the blank space where a photo of her and Jacob used to hang. Him on her lap at 5 years old, chocolate frosting on his nose. That evening, Clara brought it up gently during dinner. "I noticed some of the old pictures are gone. I was wondering if—" Sophie didn't even look up from her plate. "We're just updating the decor." Clara managed a smile. "Of course." Later that week, she decided to take a walk. It was something she did when her heart felt heavy, something to remind her she was still part of the world outside these walls. Out of habit, she pulled out her phone and opened social media. She rarely posted, but she enjoyed checking in, seeing baby photos from old co-workers, reading quotes from her book club friends. She tapped on Sophie's profile. That's when her breath caught. The profile banner was a new family photo, Sophie, Jacob, and their dog taken in front of their house. The caption read, "My perfect family, grateful every day." Clara wasn't tagged. She scrolled through the photos. Not a single one included her. The wedding album was up. Smiling shots of Sophie and Jacob, joyful chaos, dancing, laughter, but no Clara. It was as if she hadn't been there at all. Her hands trembled as she tapped to open Jacob's profile. Same story. No tags, no photos, no mentions. Even the Mother's Day post from 2 years ago was gone. Clara sat down on a bench. Her chest felt tight. Was this intentional? A mistake? Maybe it was Sophie's doing. Maybe Jacob didn't even know. She debated for days whether to say something. Finally, one evening after dinner, when Sophie had gone upstairs for a bath, Clara found Jacob in the garage, tinkering with a broken chair leg. "Jacob," she said gently, "can we talk for a minute?" He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sure. What's up?" "I was just wondering—" She hesitated, then took a breath. "I noticed the photos online, on Sophie's profile. And yours. I'm not in any of them." Jacob blinked. "Oh, yeah, Sophie's been updating everything. She likes a cleaner aesthetic." Clara smiled sadly. "I understand, but does that mean I'm no longer part of the family?" Jacob sighed. "Mom, come on, don't make this dramatic." "I'm just asking. You're reading too much into it. Sophie's trying to build something new, and you're here, but maybe it's time to give us some space." Clara's heart thudded. "Space? We just got married. We're starting fresh. You've done so much already and we appreciate it, but maybe it's time you focused on yourself a little." There it was, the soft shove, disguised in kindness. Clara nodded. "Of course, I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," Jacob said quickly. "Just maybe take a step back." Clara smiled again. This time, it didn't reach her eyes. As she walked back into the house, she passed the wall of new photos. A family rebuilt, one she no longer recognized. It happened the following Sunday. Clara was sipping her tea on the back porch when Jacob approached her, hands in his pockets, eyes not quite meeting hers. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "Sophie and I have been talking." Clara's chest tightened. She set her cup down carefully. "About what?" He exhaled like the words were heavier than he expected. "We think it might be a good idea for you to take a little break. Maybe visit somewhere. Get some air." Clara blinked. "A break?" Jacob smiled too brightly. "Yeah, you've been amazing, helping us adjust and settle in. But now that we're finding our rhythm, we thought maybe you'd enjoy some time away. You haven't traveled in years." Clara knew the sound of a door gently closing, even when it came wrapped in pretty language. Before she could respond, Sophie stepped outside, holding an envelope. "We got you something," she said, offering it with both hands like it was a birthday card. "A flight to Arizona. There's a retreat center for seniors, yoga, spa, even a writing class. It's all booked. You leave Thursday." Clara didn't reach for it. "I see," she said quietly. "Mom," Jacob added, "it's just for a few months. We'll keep in touch, of course." Clara nodded, though she barely heard him. Her ears rang. That night, she packed in silence. She folded her clothes with precision, each piece laid down like a funeral flower. She wrapped her toiletries in tissue paper, checked off her list twice, and zipped her bags without a sound. It felt like preparing for exile, but Clara didn't cry. Not yet. As she moved to close her final suitcase, she paused. In her nightstand drawer was the old birthday card, crinkled, faded, the glitter long rubbed away. "Happy birthday, Mom! I love you more than chocolate!" Clara picked it up, brushed off the dust, and slipped it into an envelope. She walked to Jacob's room, opened one of his old moving boxes, and tucked the envelope into the folds of his winter sweaters. Let him find it. Maybe not now. Maybe not even this year. But someday, she hoped, it would remind him of the mother he had before he became someone else's husband. She left the next morning without fanfare. There were no hugs at the curb. Sophie had already gone to yoga. Jacob carried her bags to the car but didn't say much. Clara sat quietly as the Uber pulled away from the cul-de-sac, the house shrinking behind her like a vanishing dream. At the airport, she checked in her luggage, moved through security, and reached the terminal gate. It was loud and sterile, people shouting over coffee orders, children crying, announcements echoing from unseen speakers. Clara sat near a window, watching planes taxi in the distance. Gate B12, departing at 11:15. She stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. A retreat center for seniors, yoga, and writing. The irony almost made her laugh. What had she become to them? An obligation to be treated. A temporary guest in their perfect new life. Clara rose slowly, pulling her boarding pass from her purse. She held it in her hand for a moment, then walked to the trash can and dropped it in without a word. Outside, she hailed a cab. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. Clara looked out the window, the city unfamiliar, yet oddly welcoming. For the first time in years, she had no destination, and it felt oddly free. "A nearby motel," she said. "Something simple just for now." That night, she checked into a small room with floral curtains and a buzzing fridge. She sat on the edge of the bed, kicked off her shoes, and listened to the sound of nothing. She wasn't going to Arizona. She wasn't going to start over in a retirement retreat. She wasn't going to disappear. She would stay. Quietly, close by. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she wasn't done writing her story yet. The room she rented was above a shuttered laundromat. The stairs creaked with every step, and the hallway smelled faintly of bleach and dust. The door to her unit stuck a little on the left. Clara had to push it hard with her shoulder every time she came home. Home. She used that word loosely now. The room was narrow with peeling wallpaper, a mattress too soft in the middle, and a kitchenette that groaned when she boiled water. The window looked out onto an alley filled with dumpsters and the back doors of old businesses. There were no flowers here, no sounds of children, no laughter bleeding through the walls. Clara spent the first week simply existing. She unpacked, stocked the fridge with cheap essentials, sat by the window each night with a blanket and a book, though she rarely turned a page. Her phone stayed silent. No texts from Jacob, no missed calls. Even the spam stopped. She wasn't surprised, just quietly heartbroken. Days blurred into one another. She ventured out only for groceries, always returning before sunset. She didn't want to be noticed. She wasn't ready for the world to ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Then one afternoon, walking back from a nearby convenience store, Clara passed a small community clinic. A poster taped to the front glass caught her eye. Free blood pressure checks. Volunteers welcome. She paused, not for the offer, but for the face behind the glass. It was familiar. Not just familiar, intimately so. "Janie?" Clara whispered, almost not believing it. The woman inside turned, squinted through the glare, and gasped. "Clara?" They met at the door like two pages folded back together. Janie Caldwell had been Clara's roommate in college for a semester before marriage, and life split them apart. Her hair was silver now, her frame smaller, but the brightness in her eyes remained unchanged. "I thought you moved to North Carolina," Janie said, hugging Clara tightly. "I thought you moved to Paris." Clara smiled weakly. "God, no, I married an accountant. Paris was a metaphor." They both laughed, short, surprised, like remembering a language they hadn't spoken in years. Over coffee inside the clinic lounge, Janie caught up on the essentials. Clara didn't say much, just that things hadn't worked out with Jacob and she was staying close, but not close enough to interfere. Janie nodded. Families are messy, even the good ones. Clara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. As they stood to part ways, Janie stopped her. "You still write?" Clara blinked. "Write?" "In college, you wrote those little poems and the stories about runaway bunnies who always came back home." Janie's eyes sparkled. "There's a community class at the library, writing for children. Free and run by a woman who once published a picture book about a goat with anxiety." Clara chuckled despite herself. "You should come," Janie urged. "Might help. You've always had that voice." That voice? Clara hadn't heard it in years. That night in her cluttered little room, she dug through a drawer until she found a legal pad and a pen. She stared at the blank page for a long time. Then slowly, her hand began to move. She wrote about a bird. Not just any bird. A large, gray-feathered thing with a crooked wing and tired eyes. A bird who once had a nest full of chirping chicks who flew miles each day to feed them, shielded them from storms, taught them to sing. But now, they'd all flown off, and none had looked back. The bird lived in a hollow tree on the edge of a town it used to call home. Every day it watched other birds build new nests, feed new babies, and laugh from branches nearby. And every day the old bird folded its wings a little tighter, wondering if it had done something wrong, wondering if maybe it had been too loud, too quiet, too much, too little. In the story, the bird finds a mirror in the forest, cracked, but clear enough. And when it looks into it, it doesn't see failure or loneliness. It sees the feathers it lost in storms, the scars from battles fought to protect, the strength in a wing that still moved, no matter how bent. And the bird whispers, "I am not gone. I am not broken. I am not done." Clara stopped writing. Her fingers trembled. The page was smudged with ink and tears. She wasn't sure if the story was for children, but she knew it was for someone. Weeks passed, and Clara continued to write. Not every day. Some mornings she simply stared out the window, sipping tea that had long gone cold. But the act of putting words on paper had softened something inside her. The ache hadn't vanished, but it no longer held her hostage. She could think of Jacob now without crying. Though the wound remained, it had scarred over into something duller, quieter. It whispered, but didn't scream. Janie had encouraged her to submit one of her stories to the local paper. "They publish community voices every Sunday," she said. "It doesn't have to be long, just honest." Clara hesitated. It wasn't that she feared judgment. She wasn't afraid of people not liking her writing. What terrified her was being seen. What if Jacob read it? What if he recognized her voice? So she used a pseudonym, E.M. Holloway, It was an old joke between her and her late husband, Edgar. They used to say if they ever wrote a book together, that would be their pen name. E for Edgar, M for Mom, as Jacob used to call her, and Holloway for the street they'd first lived on. It felt safe. Distant enough to protect, close enough to mean something. She submitted a piece titled "The Bird on the Edge of the Town." The editor accepted it quickly, replying with a short but heartfelt message. "Your story moved me. Quietly powerful." When Clara saw it in print that Sunday, in the corner of the Reflections section of the paper, her heart stuttered. Not from pride, from something quieter, like watching a message in a bottle drift out into the world. She bought 2 copies, one to keep, one to tuck into a drawer she still hadn't decided whether to open again. The following Wednesday, at a coffee shop near the park, Clara overheard a conversation. 2 young women sat at a nearby table flipping through the paper. One of them read a passage aloud from her story. "Even birds with broken wings still remember how to sing," she quoted. "Isn't that beautiful?" Clara smiled into her cup. It was the first time in months she'd smiled without guilt. That evening, Jacob sat in his apartment thumbing through the same paper. He wasn't much of a reader, but the title caught his eye. He'd always liked birds, thanks to the field guides Clara used to bring home. As he read, something stirred in him. The story wasn't just good, it felt familiar, uncomfortably so. The way the birds searched for meaning in silence, the quiet ache that hummed beneath the sentences. It tugged at something he couldn't place. He mentioned it offhand to Sophie. "I read this weirdly touching story in the paper today. Felt like, like I knew the person." Sophie didn't look up from her phone. "Maybe it's just nostalgia." "Maybe," he said. But he clipped the page and set it aside, folding it carefully. Back in her little room, Clara didn't know he had read it. She didn't expect him to. That wasn't why she wrote it. Still, that night, she stared at the page she'd clipped for herself and whispered, "Maybe you saw me. Maybe not." Later that week, Clara walked to the corner market to buy milk and apples. She still couldn't bring herself to go to the big grocery stores. Too many fluorescent lights, too much noise. She liked the quiet rhythm of small aisles and the familiarity of worn tile under her shoes. As she turned the corner near the produce section, her breath caught. Sophie was there, alone, no makeup, hair in a loose bun, wearing a hoodie too big for her frame. She was picking through tomatoes, squinting, looking exhausted. In her cart sat a box of cereal Clara used to buy for Jacob when he was little, peanut butter puffs. Clara stepped back behind a shelf of crackers. She didn't know why she hid. Instinct, maybe, or fear, or something else entirely. She peeked around the corner again. Sophie was now talking to the cashier, smiling faintly, tucking a coupon into her wallet. Clara watched her leave, her footsteps quick, her shoulders slumped. She didn't wave, didn't call out. She just stood there, invisible again. But this time, she chose it. The knock came at 3:07 a.m. Clara had just drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, the kind that only came after hours of tossing and staring at the ceiling. Outside, the rain slammed against the window like tiny fists. Thunder rumbled far in the distance, low and mournful. She sat up, heart thudding. It took a moment to realize the sound was real. Another knock. 3 short, desperate raps against the old wooden door. Clara pulled on her robe, feet slipping into worn slippers, and made her way through the dimly lit room. She peered through the peephole, squinting. What she saw made her breath catch. It was Sophie, soaked to the skin, her hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes red and swollen. In her arms was a small child wrapped in a blanket, head resting against her shoulder, sleeping. Clara opened the door slowly. Sophie didn't speak right away. She stood trembling on the threshold, rain dripping from her chin, her lips quivering. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "He's gone." Clara blinked. "What?" "Jacob," Sophie choked. "He was in a car accident 2 nights ago. He didn't make it." The words hit Clara like a punch to the chest. Her knees buckled slightly and she reached for the doorframe. I wasn't told, she murmured. Sophie nodded, ashamed. No one thought. I didn't know where you were. And everything happened so fast. The funeral was yesterday. Clara's hands trembled. She hadn't even known her son was dead. She hadn't even had the chance to say goodbye. Sophie adjusted the sleeping child in her arms. This is Tyler. He just turned 4. He doesn't understand. Clara looked at the boy. Soft brown curls, eyelashes like his father's. You didn't tell him? Clara asked. Sophie shook her head. How do you tell a 4-year-old his daddy's never coming back? They stood in silence for a moment, the rain pouring between them, thunder rolling above like the sky itself was grieving. Clara stepped aside. Come in. Sophie hesitated, then crossed the threshold. Inside, Clara wrapped them both in blankets, made tea, and sat across from Sophie at the small table by the window. Tyler slept on the couch, curled into a ball. I tried, Sophie said, staring into her mug. I went to Jacob's coworkers, his friends, even my parents. No one can help. No one has space. No one wants this. Her voice broke. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to raise him alone. I'm working 2 jobs and still can't afford daycare. I have no backup plan. Clara's hands tightened around her cup. I know I wasn't kind to you, Sophie whispered. I shut you out. I pushed Jacob to make choices I regret, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. She looked up, eyes pleading. But I am asking for help, not for me, for him. Clara glanced at Tyler. He stirred slightly, murmured something in his sleep, and turned his face toward the back of the couch. A wave of grief rose in Clara's chest, not just for the son she'd lost, but for all the moments that had been stolen from her. The birthdays she hadn't been invited to, the holidays spent alone, the silence that stretched too long and too wide. She had every right to say no, to close the door, to remind Sophie of every wound, every cold word, every dismissal. But instead, she whispered, Why didn't anyone call me? Sophie's voice cracked. Because I didn't know how to face you. Because I was ashamed. Clara looked back at Tyler. The boy didn't know any of this. He didn't ask to be caught in the crossfire of broken love. She took a deep breath, her voice firm but low. He can stay here tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. Sophie exhaled in relief, nodding. Clara stood, walked to the small couch, and gently brushed Tyler's hair from his forehead. He didn't wake, but he smiled in his sleep. Morning came slowly. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained a quiet gray, as though morning had soaked into the clouds themselves. Clara woke early, as she always did, and for a long while, she simply sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the worn carpet beneath her feet. In the other room, Sophie slept on the small couch, curled awkwardly under a borrowed blanket. Tyler was still bundled up in Clara's bed, snoring softly, his cheeks flushed with sleep. Clara moved quietly to the kitchen, put on a pot of water, and stared out the window. Her heart was heavy, and not just with grief. Jacob was gone. She had missed his funeral, his last breath, his final moments. The weight of that would never leave her. But more than that, Sophie had come, not for forgiveness, but for help, and Clara had given it, at least for one night. Now morning had arrived, and with it the reality of what came next. Sophie stirred a little later, rubbing her eyes as Clara handed her a cup of tea. I didn't sleep, she admitted. Clara nodded. Neither did I. They sat at the table for a long time, saying nothing. Then Clara spoke. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, she said calmly. This arrangement can't be temporary, and it can't be without rules. Sophie looked up, wary. Clara's voice was firm. This is not your home. You gave that up a long time ago. Sophie winced but didn't interrupt. Clara continued. Tyler is my grandson. I won't abandon him, but I also won't let you leave him here like a bag at a bus stop. I wouldn't. Yes, you would, Clara said, her tone steel, because you already are. Sophie's eyes filled, but she didn't argue. Clara took a deep breath. If he stays with me, he stays because I choose to love him, not because you choose to walk away. And if you want to be part of that, you'll follow my terms. Sophie nodded slowly. What are they? There was a long pause. Then Clara said, he doesn't call you Mom, not in front of me. Sophie's face crumpled. What? Why? Because you gave up that role when you chose to erase me, when you took Jacob from me, and when you let him forget me. I never told him to forget you, Sophie whispered. No, Clara said. You just made it easier for him to. Sophie sat back, breathing hard like she'd been hit. In the silence that followed, a small voice called from the bedroom, Grandma? Both women froze. Tyler appeared at the doorway, clutching a stuffed elephant, eyes still drowsy. Grandma, he repeated, voice soft, curious. Sophie turned to look at Clara, stunned. He's never said that before, she murmured. Not once. Clara couldn't speak. Something broke open in her chest. All the bitterness, all the sorrow. It didn't vanish, but it cracked just enough to let something warm through. Clara rose slowly, walked to Tyler, and knelt. I'm right here, sweetheart, she whispered. He walked straight into her arms. That afternoon, Clara made a decision. She called the number listed on the for rent sign posted months ago in front of her old house. The one she had once called home, the one Jacob and Sophie had claimed, remodeled and then left behind after moving across town. It had been sold to a young couple who now used it as a rental property. I'm not looking for anything fancy, Clara told them. Just want to be somewhere familiar. They were happy to rent it out, especially to a quiet senior with reliable income. Clara used what remained of her savings and a small pension to cover the deposit. It was more than she could really afford, but she didn't care. A week later, she and Tyler moved in. Clara stood in the front hallway and stared at the walls. They were different now, painted a cool beige, the curtains changed, the flooring updated. But she still knew every creak in the stairs, every dip in the kitchen tile. She walked into the living room, and for a moment she could almost see Jacob's toy cars scattered across the rug. She set Tyler's suitcase down and turned to him. This is our house now, she said gently. He looked up at her and nodded, as if that made perfect sense. In the days that followed, Clara bought secondhand furniture, stocked the pantry with peanut butter crackers and apple juice, and turned the spare bedroom into Tyler's space. She read him books at night, brushed his hair in the mornings, and packed him little lunches with smiley faces drawn on napkins. Sophie visited twice a week, quietly, respectfully. She never stayed long, and when Tyler ran to Clara shouting, "Ba-oi," she never corrected him. Clara watched her, this woman who had once helped tear her life apart, now sitting quietly at her table, holding her son's hand like she was afraid to let go. Forgiveness hadn't come yet, but something else had. Peace. And the faint outline of a future Clara never expected to have again. Clara hadn't realized how much she missed the sound of little footsteps. Each morning began the same way, the thud of Tyler jumping off his bed, the soft shuffle of his socks against the wood floor, and the sleepy call of "Ba-oi cereal," before the sun even had time to stretch. Clara would smile, stretch her old joints, and shuffle to the kitchen. Tyler sat at the table with his elbows propped up, watching the world outside the window like a tiny philosopher. Together, they made a routine. Cereal on weekdays, pancakes on Saturdays, silly stories and napkin drawings every single day. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was real, tangible. And Clara had learned, after everything, that real was enough. She walked him to kindergarten every morning, hand in hand. Sometimes he would hum. Sometimes he would ask endless questions. And sometimes he was quiet, just holding her hand like it was the only anchor he trusted in the wide, confusing world. In the afternoons, they baked simple cookies or made grilled cheese sandwiches. Clara taught him how to crack eggs without spilling them all over the counter, though he still managed to get yolk on his forehead more than once. At night, she read to him from the same books she had read to Jacob, and sometimes, when she turned the pages, she swore she could still hear echoes of Jacob's young voice laughing along with hers. Then came the day Tyler came home with a torn backpack and red-rimmed eyes. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just dropped the bag, crawled into her lap on the couch, and buried his face in her sweater. Clara's arms wrapped around him before she even asked, "Sweetheart, what happened?" He mumbled, barely audible. "They said I don't have a daddy, that I'm weird because I live with an old lady." Clara froze. Her chest tightened. Her breath caught. "I told them I live with my ba, but they laughed." Rage bloomed in her like fire licking up dry wood. She hadn't felt this kind of protective heat since the day Jacob came home with a black eye in 3rd grade, and she'd marched into the principal's office demanding answers. That very afternoon, Clara took Tyler by the hand and walked back to the school. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She calmly asked to speak with the teacher, then the principal. She explained what had happened. And in that quiet, firm voice of hers, the one sharpened by decades of love, loss, and survival, she demanded that they do better, not just for Tyler, but for every child who was different, who came from something other than a greeting card family. The school apologized, promised to address it. Promised training. Clara wasn't naive enough to think it would fix everything, but it was a start. That night, she made Tyler his favorite spaghetti, let him watch cartoons past bedtime, and tucked him in with a kiss on the forehead. "You're not weird," she whispered. "You're mine. That's the best thing to be." A few days later, Sophie came. Clara saw her through the window, standing at the edge of the front steps with a paper bag in her hand. She knocked once, then twice. Tyler was in the back, painting a dinosaur on construction paper. Clara stood still, watching the door. The knock came again. Clara walked to it, opened it slightly, just enough to see Sophie's eyes, hopeful, tired. "I brought Tyler some new books," Sophie said quietly. Clara didn't take the bag. She didn't open the door further. "Not today," she said. Sophie nodded. "Okay, maybe next week? We'll see." She closed the door gently. There was no anger in her, just boundaries. Sophie would have to earn her way back, brick by brick. That evening, Clara sat on the porch while Tyler played in the yard, chasing invisible dragons and shouting made-up spells. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the old house. And Clara, sitting there with a cup of tea and a quiet heart, felt something she hadn't in years. Not just peace, not just strength. She felt like she had a family again. It started with a flicker in the corner of Clara's eye. She had been watering the flower bed she'd rebuilt from scratch, pale daisies, a few hardy marigolds, when she noticed the curtain in the house across the street shift slightly. It wasn't the first time she'd seen movement there. Lights on late at night, the silhouette of a woman pacing, the soft glow of a TV left running. At first, she thought it was just coincidence, but after the 4th or 5th time, the pattern became clear. Sophie was living there. Clara confirmed it one Tuesday morning when she took out the trash and caught a glimpse of Sophie stepping onto the porch with a coffee mug. She wore slippers and a loose sweater, her hair unbrushed. Their eyes met briefly before Sophie turned quickly and slipped inside. She'd been across the street for nearly 2 months. Clara said nothing. She watched quietly from her own porch, sometimes seeing Sophie leave for work early, sometimes returning with grocery bags late at night. There was no car in the driveway, just a bike chained to the fence. She didn't bring visitors. She didn't knock again, but she never left completely. Sophie was watching them, watching Tyler. Clara could feel it, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now. Then came the night Tyler fell ill. It started with a cough. By dinner, his cheeks were flushed, his forehead burning. Clara gave him medicine, cool compresses, held him close in her lap as he whimpered in his sleep. But by midnight, his breathing had grown shallow, labored. His skin was hot to the touch, his small body shaking. Panic bloomed in Clara's chest. She had done this before, dozens of times with Jacob. But she was younger then, stronger, more certain. Now her hands trembled as she fumbled through the medicine cabinet. The pediatric nurse's number she'd pinned to the fridge was out of service. The thermometer flashed red, 104.3 degrees. Clara grabbed her phone to call an ambulance, but her fingers couldn't find the right buttons. Her vision blurred. Her legs felt like jelly. Then, through the open kitchen window, a voice cut the night. "Is he okay?" Clara turned. Sophie was already halfway across the street in slippers and pajamas, breathless, clutching a small bag in her hand. "I saw the lights. Something's wrong, isn't it?" Clara didn't answer. She just stepped aside. Sophie rushed in, dropped to her knees beside Tyler's bed, and immediately went to work. She took his temperature again, gave him a different fever reducer, held him upright, dabbed his forehead. She called a nearby urgent care and spoke calmly, asking the right questions, jotting notes, checking his breathing. Clara stood in the doorway, stunned. She watched Sophie cradle the boy as if nothing else in the world existed. Her hands moved with certainty. Her voice was soothing, measured. After a tense hour, the fever began to drop. Tyler stirred, his eyes fluttering open briefly. "Bah," he whispered, and then, "Mommy." Sophie froze. Her eyes welled. She smiled gently, but said nothing. They sat together in silence for a while, both women flanking the bed, watching Tyler sleep. When it was clear he was resting peacefully, Clara stood and moved to the kitchen, wordlessly boiling water for tea. Sophie followed, hesitant, unsure of where to sit. "You want mint or black?" Clara asked, her back to her. Sophie blinked. "Mint, please." They sat at the small kitchen table, the same one that had held Jacob's science projects, Clara's grocery lists, and now the weight of 2 grieving women and 1 sleeping child. Clara sipped her tea slowly. "You've been across the street," she said without looking up. Sophie nodded. "I didn't know how to ask if I could come back." Clara raised her eyes. "You can't." Sophie nodded again, quietly. "I figured." There was a long pause. Then Clara said, "But you can eat breakfast." Sophie looked up, startled. "Not because of you," Clara added firmly, "but because of him." She motioned toward the back room where Tyler slept. "I'm not ready to forgive you. I'm not even sure I want to. But that boy deserves a mother and a grandmother who don't treat each other like ghosts." Tears slid down Sophie's face. She didn't speak. "You'll take the chair by the window," Clara continued, "and you'll bring juice next time, not the cheap stuff." Sophie laughed through her tears. "Okay." They drank their tea in silence. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the houses, touching the leaves with gold. When Tyler woke hours later and padded into the kitchen, both women were still there, one stirring scrambled eggs, the other pouring juice into a cup. "Is this a sleepover?" he asked, eyes wide. Clara chuckled. "Something like that, sweetheart." He climbed into his seat, completely unaware that something profound had happened in the night. Maybe Clara couldn't fix everything, but this she could build, one breakfast at a time. A full year had passed since Tyler first called her Grandma. The seasons had moved quietly through the old neighborhood. Spring rain gave way to warm summer sun, and now golden leaves danced down the sidewalk like confetti of change. Clara had found rhythm again, not the kind she once knew, but something gentler, steadier. A soft second act to a life that once felt like it had ended early. Mornings were filled with pancakes and school drop-offs. Afternoons brought library visits, puzzle games, and stories whispered beneath homemade blanket forts. Sophie came often now, never demanding, never overstaying. She brought groceries, tidied rooms, helped with dinner. They didn't talk much about the past, but they didn't avoid it either. It was enough. Then, one Sunday morning, Sophie arrived with something in her hands, a plain white envelope. She stood in the doorway longer than usual, eyes uncertain, fingers trembling slightly. "I found this," she said quietly. "It was in one of Jacob's boxes I hadn't opened until now." Clara didn't take it right away. She simply looked at it as if the envelope might change shape depending on her mood. It didn't. It just sat there between them, fragile, powerful. Sophie spoke again. "It's addressed to you, but he never gave it to me to send. I think he meant to. I'm sorry I didn't find it sooner." Clara took it gently and nodded. No promises, no expectations. After Sophie left, Clara sat on the back porch where Jacob once played with action figures and chased summer fireflies. She held the letter in her lap for a long time, just listening to the wind rustle the branches above. Then she opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable, strong but slightly rushed, the same way Jacob always wrote birthday cards as a child, like the words might run away from him if he didn't catch them in time. "Mom, I don't know when you'll read this. I don't know if I'll have the guts to send it, but I need to write it. I've been thinking about you more than I say, more than I show. I know I've hurt you. I know I let things get complicated. Sophie and we were trying to build something new, and I thought distance would make it easier. But I miss you. I miss the way you used to hum in the kitchen. I miss your laugh when I told bad jokes. I even miss how you scolded me when I forgot to call. I don't know how to say I'm sorry. Maybe I don't deserve to say it, but I want you to know something. Before we bought the new house, I secretly transferred the deed of the old one, your house, back to your name. Sophie didn't know. I didn't tell her. I didn't want another fight. Maybe I was being a coward, but it felt right. That house was never mine. It was yours, even when I was too proud to say it. If something happens to me, I hope you'll forgive me someday. And I hope you know I never stopped loving you, Jacob." Clara read the letter twice, then a third time. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks, soft and unannounced. But there was no anger in them, no bitterness, just grief. Grief for what could have been, grief for all the words never spoken, all the chances missed. She pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, "I already forgave you." Because she had. Not in a moment of dramatic revelation, not because of the letter, not even because of Sophie or Tyler. She had forgiven Jacob long before this, in the quiet hours, in the stories she told Tyler, in the way she kept loving even after everything had been taken from her. Forgiveness had crept in slowly, like sunlight warming a room after a long winter. She stood, walked inside, and placed the letter in a small wooden box she kept on her bedroom shelf. Inside were only 3 things: a faded photo of her and Jacob at the beach, the birthday card he made her as a child, and now this letter. 3 pieces of him. 3 truths she would carry forever. Later that evening, Clara told Sophie about the letter. Every word. She didn't hide it. She didn't use it to hurt. Sophie cried quietly, and then she said, "He really did love you." Clara nodded. "I know." That night, she sat on the edge of Tyler's bed, brushing his hair from his forehead, watching him sleep. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the sharp pang of loss when she looked at her grandson. She just felt love. Deep, steady, undeniable. Jacob never said sorry. But somehow, Clara had learned to live and to love anyway. Clara sat at the small desk in her bedroom, fingers resting on the keyboard, a blank document glowing on the screen. Outside, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft light across the old porch swing and flower bed. The house was quiet. Sophie still asleep in the guest room, Tyler curled under dinosaur sheets, dreaming whatever a 6-year-old boy dreams when he feels safe and loved. She took a breath and began to type. This time, there would be no pen name, no hiding behind clever initials. The story she was about to write was hers, and she was finally ready to claim it. The title came easily, The Bird Who Stayed. It wasn't a tale of abandonment this time. It wasn't about flying away or being left behind. It was about staying, choosing to remain even when the nest fell apart, even when the branches broke, even when no one noticed the effort it took to hold it all together. She wrote about a grandmother bird who took in a chick that didn't know how to sing because the world had been too loud, too fast, too cruel. She wrote about the warmth of old feathers, the stories whispered at night, the quiet strength of love that didn't ask for thanks, a love that didn't retreat when it wasn't returned. And at the end of the story, the little bird didn't fly away. He built his nest beside hers, and they sang together, off-key but strong. When Clara finished, she signed her name at the bottom of the manuscript, Clara Thompson, then hit send. She submitted it to the same local paper that had published her first story. This time, no pen name, no pseudonym, just her. A week later, she was invited to read aloud at Tyler's elementary school during their Family Stories Week. She hesitated, unsure at first. Public reading wasn't something she'd ever done, but Tyler begged, eyes wide and hopeful. "Please, Ba, I want everyone to hear your bird stories." And so she said yes. The day of the reading, Clara wore a soft blue cardigan and pinned her hair with a clip Jacob had given her when he was 8. She brought printed copies of her story, a thermos of tea, and nerves that rattled quietly beneath her skin. The classroom was filled with children sitting cross-legged on a colorful rug, their eyes wide and expectant. Tyler beamed from the front row, legs bouncing with excitement. Clara sat in the little rocking chair at the front of the room and began to read. As she spoke, the room stilled. Children leaned forward. Even the teacher wiped away a tear as the grandmother bird in the story wrapped her wings around the little one and promised to stay, no matter what. When she finished, there was a soft silence, then applause. Tyler jumped up, ran straight to her, and threw his arms around her waist. "I love you, Grandma," he whispered. Clara closed her eyes, hugging him tightly. "And I love you more than anything," she replied. As the children returned to their lessons and parents began to leave, Sophie approached slowly. She'd been watching from the hallway, tears staining her cheeks. "That was beautiful," she said softly. Clara smiled. "Thank you." They walked outside together, Tyler skipping ahead, holding Clara's hand. When they reached the front steps of the school, Sophie hesitated. "I've been thinking," she said, "about moving again, but I don't want to." Clara turned to her, surprised. "I know I've hurt you, and I can't take that back, but if you'll have me, I'd like to stay, not just as Tyler's mother, but as someone willing to learn how to be family again." Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at Sophie, really looked at her. This wasn't the cold young woman who once erased her from photos and parties. This was someone new, someone softened by grief, reshaped by love. "Staying," Clara said quietly, "is harder than leaving." "I know," Sophie whispered, "but I'm ready to try." Clara nodded. They stood there a moment longer, watching Tyler chase pigeons across the courtyard, his laughter echoing into the bright blue sky. Later that evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Clara, Sophie, and Tyler eating spaghetti and sharing stories from their day, Clara felt something settle inside her. Not closure, not even peace, but understanding. As the sun dipped below the rooftops and laughter danced through the window panes, Clara leaned back in her chair, her gaze soft, her heart open. She thought of Jacob, of the love he gave, the mistakes he made, the silence he left behind, and then quietly she whispered to herself, "No one ever said sorry, but I forgave anyway, because I am a mother."